where we were trying to get a monkey to, gain high dimensional control of a robotic arm. Everyone sort of high-fived, and I remember the principal investigator of the lab danced through the room and said, "We've just cured paralysis." And everyone was kind of cheering, and I was sitting in my seat going, wow, you guys really don't get it. We haven't cured anything. We haven't even come close to curing anything, because this device will never go into the brain of a patient. And over in my head, there was this one quote that kept coming back to me, which was, "Progress for the sake of progress is the ideology of a cancer cell."
Next up is a fascinating conversation which is going to impact all of us, which is a neuroscientist that has already implanted a computer into the brain. While Elon Musk is talking about brain-computer interfaces, this is already happening. This is a wonderful personal story about how technology can truly augment human life, be a source of optimism and inspiration. David Putrino is the Rehabilitation and Innovation expert at Mount Sinai. He's also called the mad scientist at the Not Impossible Labs. He's accomplishing absolute miracles with patients and performers at the extreme ends of human endurance, both European League soccer players, Navy SEALs, extreme endurance sports, to those who are locked in by paraplegia or ALS or other afflictions of brain and spinal injuries and diseases. It's an absolute story of a miracle. Ladies and gentlemen, please settle down and please welcome on stage David Putrino. David is going to show us his work, and that will be followed by a conversation with the executive editor of Lucid Lines, Ritika Passi. But first, look at the world of the work that David is doing.
Thank you, Shoma. An absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. The organizers asked me to give a little bit of a background into who I am and what my approach was. So we're going to start off with a slide that I actually regret now coming to India, because this is more for an American audience where they've never even heard of Australia or where it is. But you may notice from my accent that I'm not from America. I'm actually from Western Australia, from Perth, which is down there in the southwest corner. I was also going to share a little bit about my childhood, a little bit about what brought me to a passion for neurorehabilitation. So way back, we won't talk about how many years back, but way back, shortly after this photo was taken, when I was 18 months old, I suffered what was known as a febrile seizure, meaning I had a seizure that was not epilepsy, but led to my breathing and my heart stopping for around 7 minutes. So by the time I made it to the hospital where I was revived, my parents, who are both Italian immigrants, who never really had the opportunity to experience any level of professional education, they were told by the doctors, he's paralyzed down his left side, there's nothing we can really do. Your best bet is to put him in an assisted care facility, and you can just visit him in the facility, and that's what we will do. Fortunately, my parents didn't really have that destiny in mind for me, so they took me home, and they had a very sort of simplistic mentality to it, which was, well, if he doesn't use his left side, we're just going to put everything on his left side, and his food, his toys, everything that he needs is going to be on the left side, and we're going to force him to use his left side. And fortunately, with that approach, by the time I was 3 years old, I was running around causing trouble, falling out of trees, getting in accidents, and that's a good applause for my parents, not for me, but getting in enough trouble that they were kind of regretting their hard work. And that definitely got me interested in rehabilitation. So I trained as a physiotherapist, where I specialized primarily in neurorehabilitation. And after that, I wasn't really satisfied with a lot of the treatments that we had available to patients. So I was really fortunate to complete my PhD in the University of Western Australia with two brilliant neurologists, Frank Masalia and Shomo Ghosh. We were really focused on basic neurophysiology. How does the brain control skilled movement? And just like any good PhD, I think it raised more questions than answers. And I was really fortunate after my PhD to be offered a postdoctoral fellowship with this man, Emory Brown, who was based at Harvard and MIT. So I moved to Boston, and Emory was really inventing the field of neurostatistics at this time. Emory was the guy who was saying, we have all of this data coming from the brain. We need a whole new generation of mathematics and statistics to even think about how to analyze it and harness the brain signal, in the way we could. And I'm not going to tell anyone here that I became some brilliant neurostatistician, but what I did learn here was how to have an intelligent conversation with a brilliant neurostatistician, which is almost just as hard. So it was a really good time working with Emory, but at this point, the experimentalist in me was getting itchy again. I wanted to do something, where I was running experiments. So I moved to NYU, and I started working on a brain-computer interface project. For those who don't know, brain-computer interfaces, if you've been living under a rock and haven't heard of Elon Musk, trumpeting about BCIs, these are technologies that read in brain activity and then use that brain activity to control some sort of external device. It can be a robotic arm, it can be a toaster, but the point is that your device is being controlled by your brain from the signals that you harness. Now, what was really interesting about my time at NYU was the fact that I was the only clinician on the team. Everyone else were engineers and neuroscientists. And we were working in an experimental non-human primate model, and we were training this monkey to control all sorts of things with brain activity alone. And it was at this point where I realized how much of a disconnect there was between what was happening in the lab and what was happening clinically. So, for instance, when we finished our first Department of Defense funded grant, where we were trying to get a monkey to gain high dimensional control of a robotic arm, everyone sort of high-fived, and I remember the principal investigator of the lab danced through the room and said, "We've just cured paralysis." And everyone was kind of cheering, and I was sitting in my seat going, wow, you guys really don't get it. We haven't cured anything. We haven't even come close to curing anything, because this device will never go into the brain of a patient. And over in my head, there was this one quote that kept coming back to me, which was, "Progress for the sake of progress is the ideology of a cancer cell." And that was what I was seeing in these labs, progress for the sake of progress. And so this was what really sort of got me excited about building out my own lab. So I started interviewing different places, and I came across Mount Sinai Hospital, which is a large hospital system, and I was interviewing with the dean, and he told me from the outset when I was interviewing with him, he really didn't want to hire me because I didn't have the profile of a traditional academic. I wasn't so interested in chasing grants, but he said, "Look, a few people have said good things about you, so I'm going to give you a chance, but let me tell you a bit about Mount Sinai." And he proceeded to tell me all of these amazing facts about Mount Sinai. We're the biggest employer in New York City. We have over 50,000 employees. We are 8 hospitals. We have, some of the most prestigious NIH grants. We win all of this grant money, blah, blah, blah. I was very impressed. I'm nodding along going, wow, where is this headed? And he said, and if we don't innovate faster than we currently are, we're going to be dead in 20 years. So pitch me an idea that makes me uncomfortable and I'll hire you. No pressure, right? So I said, okay, I'll pitch you an idea that makes you uncomfortable. I'm the academic and I want to be hired, and I will not write a single grant. I'm going to run a division of innovation that focuses on partnering with industry, that focuses on getting technology into the hands of patients who need it the most. And our center is going to be focused on three main principles. The first is that healthcare innovation takes too long. There's this terrible statistic in the United States that to go from bench to bedside, to go from the point where you first get a working prototype of something to the point where it's in common clinical usage, takes 17 years. That's too long. That number shouldn't be real, but it is. So our first guiding principle is we're going to make this number smaller. Our second guiding principle is no patient should ever be told there's nothing more we can do. It's a lie, and I have never once in my entire career of clinical practice and clinical research of over 20 years, I have never once run out of ideas or run out of a new technology that we can chase for a patient in a situation that is seemingly helpless. So we never want anyone to be told there's nothing else we can do. And then our final principle is understanding that human performance happens on a spectrum. So we don't necessarily need to think about helping someone recover just to a point where they were before. If we really want to buy into this idea of human performance and pushing the human body beyond its limits, we should be looking at a stroke survivor and saying, okay, well, I know where you were before you had your stroke, but let's get you even further down this spectrum after we start recovering. We don't just stop when you get to where you were before. And then working with athletes who are on the other end of the spectrum, let's see what technologies and things we can do to push you even further. So with these guiding principles, I guess the interview went okay. I got a guarded yes. Let's start the position, and I started my first center. Fast forward 6 years, and we now have 5 centers that have a different focus, each have a different focus on a different aspect of human performance and innovation in rehab. We treat over 6,000 patients every year, and at any one time we're running about 50 different clinical trials in collaboration with industry. So I wanted to now just share some of the projects that we're working on, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion about the approach. So, in terms of human performance, this is one project that we ran where we were working with ultra-endurance cyclists. So these are cyclists who engage in competitions where they have to ride over 1,300 miles in a single race. And we were pushing them to the absolute edge of muscle failure and then trying to see if we could use brain and nerve stimulation techniques to get even more muscle activity out of them. Spoiler alert, we actually couldn't, but it was really fun to work on this technology and try to see how far we could push muscle activity in these high-performance athletes. Right on the other end of the spectrum, we were also working with individuals such as Chris. Chris was a professional skydiver who had completed over 10,000 jumps. When one unfortunate day his parachute did not open appropriately, and if you can believe it, he survived the drop, but sustained a spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed from the neck down. So Chris came to me and was one of those individuals who had been told, there's nothing else, there's no other options for you, and there's nothing else we can do. But he had that athlete mindset, and he had this this thing inside of him where he wanted to push beyond the limits. He just didn't have, the technology that would allow him to support. So I sat down with Chris, and we determined that one thing that he was great at, he had incredible lightning-fast reflexes, really good cognition. So we set him up with a whole bunch of adaptive technology, and we formed the world's first esports team made up entirely of quadriplegic athletes who are now out in the world competing against non-disabled athletes and winning. They're called the quad gods, and look out for them because they're definitely going to be making a big entrance into the world this year. We've also gotten to work on some incredible projects in human performance that really taught us to understand and appreciate the fact that even when you have a performance task such as this, which was the Red Bull Stratos project, where Felix Baumgartner jumped out of a capsule in the stratosphere and performed a skydive back to Earth. This is actually a group performance task, and coming to terms with the delicate dynamics that exist between an individualistic performer and their team is incredibly important. And so we often study team dynamics in high performers and how to optimize those team dynamics so that an individual can perform while the team stays on planet Earth, making sure that they remain safe and it works out well. We also work in low resource and high challenge environments. So about 10 years ago, we learned about Daniel, who was a young boy in South Sudan who lost both of his arms when a landmine exploded in a field that he was herding in. And he had no options available for him for upper extremity prosthetics. And he was actually quoted as saying that he wished the mine had killed him because without prosthetics, he was a burden on his family and he didn't have any options. And just based on this idea that no 14-year-old should be expressing those sentiments, we were able to go out to South Sudan and set up the world's first 3D printed prosthetics lab. And Daniel was able to, use a device that was fully 3D printed, and it regained a lot of his independence. So we were really excited about that particular project. We also, actually this is a photo taken just 3 weeks ago when I was in Kenya, working with Maasai tribesmen and tribespeople, because we're also very interested in understanding high performance in areas where we don't usually travel. And so this individual, his name is Hudson, and we went out and tested his VO2 max, which gives us an idea of how much his body is able to sort of process oxygen and oxygenate his blood, and his VO2 max sat at around 73. This is an untrained individual, and ordinarily, if you're winning the Tour de France, your top VO2 max is probably 80. This kid who's walking around in the bush, never trained before in his life, was sitting on a VO2 max of 73. So understanding that there are folks out there and understanding the physiology of people in places that we don't ordinarily look becomes a really exciting way to understand the limits of human performance in the world. And then the last project I'll tell you about in short form is a project that has probably spanned the longest point in my career, which is working with individuals who are completely locked in as a result of illnesses like ALS or high-level spinal cord injury. This is a graffiti artist by the name of Tempt1, who sadly recently passed away, but Tempt had ALS and was completely locked into a bed. And so what we did initially was we created a device called the iRider because he couldn't afford eye tracking technology. This device versus eye tracking technology, which at the time cost about $30,000, this technology cost $20, and it allowed him to create art again, interact with a computer, and interact with his family, communicate with his family. But it also begged the question to me, okay, well, what about folks who can't move their eyes? What about folks who can't wear glasses because their skin is too sensitive and it might cause pressure areas? So we started working with a company called Synchron that has created a brain implant that actually enters the body through the jugular vein and travels through the jugular into a large vessel in the brain called the superior sagittal sinus, where it can record brain activity. And once it's recording brain activity, it's fully implanted, so you basically, it just communicates with a little pacemaker device that sort of sits in your chest, and it allows us to record motor intention from patients. And I just wanted to share a video of our second implant patient independently controlling a smartphone for the first time since his ALS had him completely locked in, and this individual had no eye tracking capabilities whatsoever. And toward the end of this, you can just see a little smile on his face as he sort of realizes the enormity of what he's accomplished with this technology. And all of this is happening purely cognitively. There's no other physical interaction with this technology. We've since implanted 6 individuals with this technology, and they're all similarly able to independently control a device with thought alone, which is super exciting. And I've gotten to talk about a few exciting projects. I wanted to give you just one long-form video of why it all matters and why we do what we do. And this is a story of Joe Scani, who is a composer who used to live in New York City, and that's his daughter sitting with him, Gina. And one day I learned about Joe, who was an accomplished pianist, and his Parkinson's disease had robbed him of the ability to play piano anymore and create music. So we worked on a project to help him out, and I'm going to show that story now. Hopefully.
When I'm lying in bed, sometimes I think about those performances. How good they were, how bad they were. Then I hear all the instruments being played, and I hear all the musicians. I just fell out of bed and couldn't walk. And figured, what the hell is going on? And I thought, well, I'll get over this in a day or so. Probably have a cramp or something.
And then we went to the doctor, and she did the test, and she said, you got Parkinson's, early Parkinson's. So we said, okay, we'll get through it.
How did you guys meet?
At the studio. My
were you doing?
girlfriend was dating the owner of the studio, and she said, Maria, you got to come over and meet this guy. I said, oh, another Italian piano player.
Another one?
She had a nice Steinway there, and I was playing on it. And that's why she couldn't resist.
I one day had this harebrained idea that maybe the deaf, rather than standing in front of speakers to experience music, that what if we broke those vibrations up, wrists, ankles, chest, different places, and then sent the music through those so that you could distinguish the different instruments. But one of the things that we're always talking about is that
Look out.
we're on the lookout for stuff that, because you never know what's going to come up, you never know the accident that's going to happen.
And there's nothing to be done. The only thing possible is this device that could stop the tremors, and also I'm looking forward to him walking better. We could travel a little more.
You know what we call David? He's our chief mad scientist.
Well, he's a good one.
He's an amazing one. He introduced me to a brilliant mad scientist named Daniel, and that was about 2.5 years ago. So,
Do you want to hit that?
yeah.
Oh, there it is.
It completely stopped.
I don't understand it. I don't understand it. It feels normal now.
So will you do this? When you go fast? It's like a 1 or 2 second delay when that goes off. And it's like 1001, 1002, boom. So when you stopped playing music because of Parkinson's, did you ever dream about it at night? Did you ever dream about it?
Absolutely. I mean, this is my life. Things change. When the piano tuner came, he was here a few weeks ago. He asked me if I played anymore, and I said, well, you know, I don't play that much. And I started to cry. It's difficult. Even when we go out to dinner, walking down the street, you know, I'm wobbling. But I refuse to use a walker or a cane. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to walk, or else I'm going to fall down. I just have to walk like I'm walking. And that's what I try to do. It's the first time that I've ever had anything that's encouraging. I hope we do something with this. I really do. Because this is a disease that nobody really understands. And I hope you guys come out with an alternative method of solving this riddle.
One of the goals that we have at All Impossible is we don't have the degrees and the credentials or any of the stuff we're supposed to have.
The grit is what's important. I don't care how many degrees you have if you don't have the grit. You have to have the grit. You know what I mean by the grit?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There has to be a feeling of soul. And I say soul, and that's a cliche word. I don't mean that. But you have to feel what you're doing. But you have to feel it. And then it works.
So, I don't think I can do it better than Joe did it, but I'll just leave you with one last comment, which is, there's absolutely nothing special about us or what we do. All we've ever done is just listen to the people who tell us that they want to get better and try and find answers for them. So my last, slide is just, please understand that every single person in this room can be doing what we're doing. Every single person here. There's not a single special thing about what we do other than listening to our community, listening to the needs, and making sure that those needs come to life. So I wanted to leave you with that and thank all of my amazing collaborators for helping me with this. And we got some time to talk. Thank you.
David, thank you for sharing that, first of all, and we couldn't have let you go without asking a few questions after this amazing presentation. It was moving, it was enlightening, and it was empowering. And it shows us how technology can open a door when the human body seems to have hit a wall or when it becomes locked in. Actually, I should say when access to technology. It's the access that provides us that door. All these examples, by the way, that you've seen are just the tip of the iceberg. I'd invite you to please check out David's website. There's plenty more examples. Robotics, exoskeletons being put into use. There's virtual reality for chronic pain, brain simulation, cutting edge that's truly rewiring our brain. David, since you work with two groups of people that at first glance seem at opposite ends of a spectrum. You have high-performance athletes, Olympic fencers, basketball players, break dancers, surfers, and then on the other hand, you have stroke survivors, brain injury patients, people who are locked in, as you've mentioned. What is the connection that you've seen? How have you been able to translate your work with high-performance athletes to treating patients?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one of the things that really troubled me when I started working with high-performance athletes was, whether I'm dealing with a leading NBA basketballer or a person who's recovering from a stroke, the goal is the same. We're trying to teach an adult nervous system how to do something new or how to relearn either a new way of doing things or a better way of doing things that suits their body. However, when you look at what we provide to an NBA player, they've got a strength and conditioning coach, they've got a skills coach, they've got a nutritionist. They will spend 6 to 8 hours a day training on different aspects of their performance area, all for incremental improvements in performance. And yet, when we look at what we afford stroke survivors, where we're asking them for the same thing, we're asking for their nervous system to learn a new way of doing things, we provide them with a fraction of those resources. And so, one of the first things that has been a big passion of mine is finding technological ways where we can address this gap in access that people who are recovering from an illness or an injury have to the same level of resources that we would give to someone who is, a high-performance athlete or military, member.
And I believe you call this superhero training?
Well, we think about it that way. We tend to idolize these athletes. We call them superheroes, and we call them, we do idolize them and put them on a pedestal. And, one of the things, just as Joe mentioned in the video, grit. I see just as much grit in a stroke survivor trying to stand and walk and make a difference in their own life for the first time after their stroke. Relearning how to walk and speak and move in your 70s and 80s is just as heroic as putting a ball in a hoop. And I think that we need to give a bit more airtime to that.
I'm going to steal another one of David's phrases, which is this notion of treating rehab like play can effectively change lives in a far bigger manner than I think we're used to seeing. Has this link, by the way, been made before? I know you mentioned that when you were hired by Mount Sinai, that's when you opened this new division that didn't exist before, Rehabilitation Innovation, this division. But was this idea there before?
The idea of tracking enjoyment during rehab was actually being sort of dodged and sidestepped quite a bit. Of course, anyone in the audience who is a teacher knows that not only is there decades of literature, but there's also decades of lived experience that if you want your kids to learn something, you've got to make it fun, you've got to make it engaging, you need to make them want to learn, otherwise you're not going to be a very effective teacher. No one had made that link into motor recovery after brain injury or stroke or spinal cord injury. It was just, as many repetitions as possible. However, once again, in the athletic training world, or even in any area of performance that you choose to mention, we know that you need to keep athletes fresh. You need to keep coming in with new training approaches to keep their minds active, to keep them creative, to keep them wanting to get up on that bike every day or run on the treadmill every day. And so again, it just really struck me as this dangerous disparity of why are we doing it over here, and why is it accepted as gospel over here on this side of the spectrum, but on this side of the spectrum we say, nah, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that they move their wrist 100 times and then you can leave the room because you've done your job.
That's incredible enough. And I'd like to share with the audience another area of David's work, which is on long COVID. So in a magazine, there was an article written by a mother who shared her experience about Becky, I believe her name was, and her 11-year-old son. It ended up being that her son had contracted COVID and was now suffering from long COVID. And she hit a wall trying to figure out how to alleviate the symptoms, what to do about it, and she couldn't find any answers. She found David's link on the website. She reached out, and David immediately replied. David, could you please share some work that you're doing on long COVID?
Being in New York City in 2020, when the pandemic really hit us, was kind of a terrible privilege, and our whole team had to work frontline in the hospitals, and we were seeing a lot of COVID cases, but fairly soon after March of 2020, we started to see long-term effects of COVID. And part of our sort of impetus when we do rehab innovation is, if there's a population asking for help, we don't turn away. Our situation by May of 2020 was we had hundreds, if not thousands, of New Yorkers asking for help. They were saying, I don't know, I was fit and healthy, I got a mild case of COVID, and now I can't walk up my stairs anymore. I can't, think the way I used to think, what's going on. And so since 2020, we've been aggressively researching COVID and other long COVID and other post-acute infection syndromes. Our team has been amongst just a few in the world that have started to publish work that show very clear biological differences between people living with long COVID and healthy controls who do not have long COVID. So much so that in late last year, we published a paper showing that using a machine learning model, we could accurately identify people with long COVID versus healthy controls with 96% accuracy using blood biomarkers, which hadn't been done previously.
So that's another cutting edge of science that David is breaking, or is at. The science is clearly fundamental, but so is the approach. And we've seen ample evidence of that in David's PPT. I want to spotlight on that, however, this approach that you have of making breakthrough technology mainstream. Could you share some challenges that you still face and perhaps some successes?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that very early on in my career, I was very much bothered by the fact that we would publish a new paper and then I would get inevitably about 100 emails from stroke survivors or their family saying, can I get access to this technology? And my answer would have to be no. My answer was like, sorry, we just ran the clinical trial. I don't know what else to tell you, wait 17 years. And that was not a satisfactory answer. So we set up a situation where once we completed the clinical trials, if the outcomes were good enough, we would offer that technology in our lab, and we would work with regulatory agencies to make sure that we could safely and responsibly give patients immediate access to the technology while we worked on reimbursement strategies so that insurers would pay for it and so on and so forth. And, we've had many wins over the last decade working in this way, but, I think one of the, very exciting wins was just that device that you saw Joe use. That video was taken 6 years ago, and just last week that device became commercially available online in the United States. So thank you. Oh God, we're getting the bell rung.
But that's great. And thank you, David, again, for sharing your journey with us and starting from your own origin story. And I think the one thing that I'm taking away from this session, honestly, is the fact that science doesn't need to be clinical, pun intended. It doesn't need to be distant. It doesn't need to be something other, not understandable. It's actually pretty immediate, timely, and needed. So thank you, David, again, for the work that you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.